Actually, this is one of those situations where I should hit record before
Okay.
we start talking too much because this is a topic I've been wanting to go into for a while, and it may even be an ongoing
Yeah.
discussion in various ways. So, uh, welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that connects mental health services to people who have experienced the trauma of a positive STI diagnosis. On top of that, what we're doing is working to raise money and partner with organizations that work in STD prevention so that we can figure out a way to uh enter what? What is the word? Enter Oh, I was doing so well and then it just messed it up.
Interconnect.
Interconnect isn't the word.
That's the first thing that came to mind.
Intervene? Enter Wow. What am I doing with my life right now? We
Or
want to integrate. Wow, I couldn't say integrate. We want to integrate post STI diagnosis support resources with STD prevention efforts. That was a mouthful. Uh, so yeah, one of the things that Something Positive for Positive People does is we interview people who are living with STIs about their experience so that we get more of an understanding from a qualitative perspective on what the numbers aren't really highlighting. All right, so today's guest is Taylor, and you have the Instagram account Two Chronic.
to care. There's a lot of underscores.
Yeah, I
Literally.
was like, that's not right. There's an underscore somewhere.
Yeah. I'm pumped to be here. My name's Taylor, and I just created this account about a month ago, so I'm a little new to this space, but really excited just to like share my story, connect with like strangers literally across the world. One of my favorite people I message is in Australia. So, been really fun to just share experiences, learn that people from all over actually have a lot more in common with me than I thought. So, I'm excited to just kind of vent it all out and see who it resonates with. But it's been an awesome and positive experience. So,
Yeah. All right. So without leading the discussion too much into this topic, like I said, it's going to be an ongoing conversation just about disclosure fatigue and how it weighs on us to have this expectation on us as the people who have herpes or have something that we need to disclose, feeling so much pressure of needing to A, initiate the conversation, and then B, to feel like what it is that we have to disclose is going to be the make or break thing about the relationship or the interaction, taking it to the next level, right? So, for you, you have two chronic illnesses. Can you disclose what they are for us?
yeah. So, type 1 diabetes, which I got my diagnosis when I was 13. So, I've had it for about 12 years now. Um, And then more recently, genital herpes, which was last March. So I'm not new to the chronic illness world just because of type 1. So I look back and realize that the herpes diagnosis wasn't as much of a shock per se, because I'm like, oh, I'm used to having something that there's no cure and I just have to deal with it. So it wasn't that much of a shock in that regard, but more of the mental stigma and just disclosing in that way. So, yeah, type 1 diabetes, for people who don't know, basically my pancreas just fought off the wrong like cells in my body. So it fought off the insulin producing cells. So I no longer can produce insulin on my own. Um, so basically, when I was diagnosed, I was 90 pounds, going to the bathroom all the time, drinking so much water, eating nonstop, wouldn't gain a single pound. People actually thought I had an eating disorder, so I would go to the bathroom so much. So I was like a little middle schooler. I didn't know what was wrong with me, trying to function as normal. I actually found out I had it through a yearly checkup, so it was a surprise. Whereas some people, they can go into DKA, which is diabetic ketoacidosis, um, where your blood's turning into acid. It's like a diabetic's worst nightmare. So a lot of people find out that way, where their numbers are like 900, normal range, you want it to be between like 80 and 120. Um, so I wouldn't say I like lucked out with when I found out, but I was able to gradually learn about it, not be too thrown into the ringer at such a young, like developmental age. Um, but yeah, I mean, I can go more and more into that. I have so many little stories just leading up to where I am now, but
Hmm.
uh, definitely shaped me a lot before the herpes diagnosis.
Oh, well, yeah, let's
Just like
go
a
in.
step
Let's go ahead and go into that. So, what I'm foreseeing as we talk is just kind of matching parallels here between diabetes and herpes in your experience exclusively. So, yeah, talk me through your herpes diagnosis.
Yeah, so last March, I was dating someone. We had just deemed that we were exclusive, whatever that means. I feel like that's such a gray term nowadays. So
Yeah, you got to define it with one another.
yeah, I feel like it wasn't defined enough because um, he was actually cheating. Whole nother story, but I believe that's how I got it. He was juggling between us both and picked the other gal, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, it was a huge shock. I developed symptoms, which actually, like the week prior, I was like, okay, we're exclusive. Let's get an STI test, make sure we're like good to go if we're just going to be with each other. So I did, which I've now learned that the STI tests don't include herpes anyway. So that's something I didn't even know existed or wasn't included. That he said he'd get tested. I trusted him. Oops, I'm not sure if he did. But yeah, so I got it from him. Went to the doctor. Was having the worst. Um, I guess I didn't know what it was at the time, but I was having these like tears. Couldn't walk. Had to still go to work and could barely move. I was like, what is going on? So yeah, I went to my gyno. She knew right away. Took the swab, um, which I guess is the fastest way to learn that you have it. So she was very lovely. Walked me through it. Super calm. I guess my first instinct was he cheated. And she's like, no, 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 it could be other things. It could be asymptomatic. Like, he might not even know. So I was trying to see, given the benefit of the doubt, basically. So I went into it knowing that I was diagnosed. Didn't really know too much about the stigma. I just knew that no one wants to get an STI that doesn't go away. But for me, as a diabetic, I know what it's like to have something you can't cure. So I then had him over for dinner and slowly told him, like, use the advice from my doctor, gave doctor's references, all the
Hmm.
facts.
Your doctor gave you advice on disclosing?
She, because I told her that I was having dinner with him, like, we already had pre made plans, and she kind of gave me a walk down of, like, he might ask this or, like, want to know the actual stats. She was great, which I
Yeah.
know that doesn't happen to most. So I look back and I'm very grateful that I had her. Um, but yeah, I told him about it. I think he was about to pass out. He went white, and I don't know if that was because he knew he gave it to me or it was just like, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this. So who knows? But I was like the comforting one, which was so twisted. But that's just me, I guess.
No, it's not. It's not. It's women. Several women who have gone back to disclose their status to their partners have become the comforting one, regardless if the other person is likely who would have given it to them. Because the thing about it is, like, for people who have sex with men, we don't have a reason to go in annually for wellness exams. If my dick ain't itching, if I don't see anything wrong with it, if it's getting hard, I don't feel a need to go to the doctor, right? And that's a lot of us. And then if our partners, uh, you go to at least your annual women's wellness exam once a year, and I am, in my experience, a lot of women have gotten tested at those for STIs. And so, one thing that I've noticed about myself and several men that I've spoken to is our metric of our STI status is contingent on our partner's results, right? Shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that, that's how we go about it. Because if you ask men, and women are really typically afraid of asking men, hey, when's the last time you were tested for STIs? And guys will be like, and when you hear that, like, that's a sign, hey, we need to go right now. Like, let's go and get ourselves tested. If you can't even tell me when the last time you were tested was. And it's unfortunate, this is another thing that just falls on the responsibility of people who have sex with men, is to initiate this conversation and to hold them to the standard of, which this shouldn't even be a thing, but knowing what their STI status is, at least recently, if
Yeah.
you're someone that's like, oh, I don't get tested, I don't have anything, nothing's wrong, speaking into stigma that way, because like that's a thing that fuels the stigma, thinking that you only have a problem when you have a problem, right?
Right.
But you could have STIs and them not present any symptoms at all. So just circling back with all of that and bringing it to a conclusion, oftentimes all of this responsibility is exclusively on you as the person who's aware of your status. And then you also have to go into, after disclosing, comforting his ass. Like, where's your comfort? Who was there for you? Who's gonna be there for you?
Yeah. I know, it's silly me. I made like dinner. I was like, okay, let me just like kind of ease the tension. But
But
even though it wasn't anything, it was,
does
yeah, I look back, I'm like, okay, hang on.
does taking care of other people sort of like heal you or do something for you internally? Because maybe that's what it is too. It's just like it appeals to your caretaker and you get a sense of validation out of that more so than you would being like, get the fuck out of my house. Like, no, you didn't. No, I'm crying, not you.
Yeah. I know, as much as I wish I was like, I'm never so blunt. I always like to sugarcoat it or be the one that someone can vent to and I'll like throw it back. But yeah, I know. And I look back too and I'm like, okay, I I'm not good at juggling different people. I always just stick with one person. I can't handle it. Like I'll overlap stories and I just want to be full focused. So I don't even with this guy and we should have made it a little bonding experience to go together. But if he did actually go, like I was hoping he would, maybe they would have caught it. But that's like a whole look back at the past. You just can't go there because now it's like, all right, you have it. You've got to carry on. And I know I commented on when you were chatting about someone else had wrote like wanting the vengeance and like if someone gave it to you and they don't like admit it, that totally resonated with me because man, I pondered like, did he know? Did he know he was being between us two and not being safe? And just so much like hatred and he also broke up with me on the phone on my birthday. Like he's just not a good guy, basically. So
Mm,
I don't yeah, it's just but now I'm like, okay, so many positives have come out of it. That's just me. I have to like flip it to the positive so I can function. But I went to therapy because of this, which totally anyone should go. It's amazing because now I'm over the herpes like frustration and betrayal, and now we just talk about work and nothing herpes related. So it's kind of brought like good things into my life looking back, but and I don't get that many outbreaks. It's just not as big of a deal as I'm realizing society makes it. So,
right. When you
yeah.
say that you've gone to therapy and like gotten over the herpes, right? Can I ask what about your therapy, what about your sessions helped you get through or over having herpes? Like
Yeah.
what was that like?
I remember my first session, I didn't even say my name. I just went in and I blurted everything out. I think that's just like what I needed to do. Because I didn't fully, I would vent about the breakup to friends, but they didn't know the full story of that the herpes was involved at first. So I've I share with friends more um, easily now. It's not like a big deal if I share that I have herpes to any of my friends. They all know. Um, but yeah, I went in and I did some research before because I knew he had done. He worked in like a clinic for testing and like sexual assault victims. So I knew he just was a good guy and could understand something like that. So I knew he had the background, especially all the facts that I might not have known up front. And he helped me understand how common it was, which I've since followed a lot of accounts who reiterate that, but I don't think I got that initially from my doctor. She told me like disclosure tips, which was great, very helpful. But he kind of reiterated, okay, this is so common. You're not alone. A lot of my clients come in for this, so just gave me that peace of mind that I think I was so wrapped up in all the anger from the breakup, I wasn't really thinking about, okay, how do you internalize and like come to terms with this and then move on with your own life. So yeah, and the whole kicker of why I started going, besides the herpes, was I saw that he had officially made it official with the other girl. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get over this. I have to block these accounts. I can't. This is just draining energy. So another push to go. But when I got there, and I kind of whispered it too. When I was in his office, I was like, I have herpes, and like so quiet. Uh, and towards like a couple sessions in, I would say it very loudly and had confidence behind it. So I also think that helped me a ton because I do find that a lot of people are very hush hush, which can absolutely be that way until they're more comfortable. But I think just saying all these things to him and sharing the full background and just saying the word was huge. So,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
How is having herpes similar to having diabetes?
Yeah. So I was actually looking at some like facts and so with type 1, so first there's a lot of different types um, that I wasn't even aware about with diabetes. So I have type 1 where my pancreas just kind of stopped producing insulin. And then there's type 2, which is actually more genetic, where there's insulin resistance. But a lot of people assume it's just because you're overweight or you're not like putting care into your body, but it's actually through genes more than anything. Then there's like gestational, and there's about five others, which National Diabetes Awareness Month in October, and learning all these new things about a disease I like have. So it's very stigmatized. So similar in that way, people think that you did it to yourself, where you didn't take care of your body, you like ate too much sugar, and you gave yourself diabetes, and you can just stop eating sugar and get rid of it, which for type 1, that's like absolutely not a thing. Like, you cannot get rid of it until there's a cure, and your only option is basically insulin therapy to function, and you're basically acting as an organ. So hearing that, it gets super frustrating because I didn't do it to myself. Cause is unknown. No one knows, like, you literally don't know why I got it. I have no idea. I was sick the week before, so they thought maybe my body was just susceptible, but it's not proven. And then people, 90% of diabetics, 90 to 95, are type 2. And then the rest is either type 1 or the other types of diabetes. So it's a very small pool. So people just lump it in, which makes me think of herpes, how there's different types. And type 1, oral herpes, cold sores, are more people have it. Like I was looking at the global population, like about, if I'm wrong on this, I thought it was like 60 some percent maybe have like HSV1, and then HSV2, it's about 11 of the global population. So it kind of reminds me of the stats and how they're a little flipped. People just assume that, like, I do the parallel of okay, people think I eat too much sugar, and that's why I have type 1. And then on the flip side, people think you're really promiscuous or like you deserve like herpes, and that's why you have it. So that's my big parallel, which I'm realizing it's so crazy. Um, yeah, it's just so crazy the assumptions, and people think you did it to yourself when they're really unknowns you can't control, or like herpes, asymptomatic, or not included in tests, and you just don't know. And everyone's human, and this stuff just happens. Unfortunately, I got a double whammy with this little combo. Um, but yeah, and stigma. Um, a lot of underlying stigma with both, obviously, but people thinking with the sugar thing, or um, people don't understand all the gadgets on my body. I have like my CGM, continuous glucose monitor, so I don't have to prick my sugars anymore. So that's like a little dot all over my body. I have a sticker on it that says Wi-Fi right now, actually, because people think it's like a personal hotspot. They've come up to me and like tapped it, uh, or they'll think it's like quit smoking patch or birth control. List goes on and on, but people just jump up, assume, don't really ask. So yeah, the things I get with that. Um, yeah, and then with herpes, I mean, obviously there's a stigma. People don't really understand it, and if you cross compare it with other STIs, now that I'm on the flip side, I think I grew up being like, oh, I won't get an STI, I'm safe, everything will be fine, and then I got one, and I'm I was like, I feel like I've gotten like the worst one, like stigma wise, that it can't be cured, but I'm used to that. But you think of the other STIs, and if you don't take care of it, you could get cancer, you could like die, but no one talks about that. So yeah,
Did having diabetes prepare you for your herpes diagnosis?
definitely. I mean, I wasn't shocked. It was like the doctor was like that you'll never be able to cure it. Like you'll take antivirals to help, and I was like, oh okay. I'm like I take insulin every day. Like I'm used to that. So I don't
And
know if I would.
with insulin, do you take it multiple times a day, or do you prick yourself
Yeah.
multiple times a day? Like, how's that work?
So the CGM allows me to like see my readings. I have like a watch, and I'll be able to see it, all the patterns, all the trends. So that's like a completely different gadget on my body. And then I have a insulin pump, which basically acts like my pancreas. And I'll have a site in my body somewhere, which I have to put like a metal needle, which is like pretty big in my body, but now I don't feel it. I'm like so used to it at this point, but that connects to my pump where I then get insulin. So I always have like it looks like I have three sites on me all the time. Um, but yeah, it's not bad. I mean, the CGM, if I didn't have that, I'd have to prick my finger like 10 times minimum a day.
Woo!
So I know. So that's another thing I wanted to talk about is that diabetes is so visible and you can see it. So I always have gadgets on me. I have scars everywhere, just scar tissue buildup from all the sites. I still have marks on my fingers, even though I don't prick them as much. So that I think, yeah, I just always talk about it, and I never question it. And if someone's like, "Oh, you got that because you had too much sugar," or like, "Oh, is that a pager?" talking about my pump, I have to be like, "Okay, let's sit down and like chat it out."
Mm.
Which is it's no big deal to be like, "Okay, actually,
Yeah.
type 1 is different than type 2 or other types." So I feel like a broken record
Mm.
talking about it, but I mean, people still aren't fully educated,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
And
So,
I understand, situationally, you don't need to understand everything about everything. I think there's just
totally.
general common knowledge that should be the common human decency, right? You
Yeah.
are sick, right?
Mhm.
So jumping in and making assumptions doesn't help. Like when you say diabetes, if I don't know anything about diabetes other than type 1, type 2, it would be a matter of just asking questions like, oh, what type do you have? And if you're in the space of going into as much detail as you want, awesome. But if you're not,
Yeah.
also awesome, because this is your time, it's your
Right.
energy, it's your energy management. So
Yeah.
when you find yourself in a situation where someone comes at you that way, I compare that to when people make a herpes joke that is
Mm.
completely inaccurate. Like Donald Trump's not going away, just like herpes, right?
Oh, I know. There's so many around the election. It was brutal.
Yeah, and so when I hear that, I have to, hey, that's not accurate. Herpes outbreaks come and go, but
Right.
it's not an accurate thing to say that herpes doesn't go away. It's just not an accurate statement. And
Yeah.
then that may lead to more discussion if the person's willing to go there. With diabetes, do you find that like when you start talking, people kind of feel like shit? And then now you go into having to comfort them because they've made an ass out of themselves, saying that this thing that, this process that you have to go through, this experience that you have to have of constantly monitoring your blood sugar
Hmm.
levels and eat on time. Like, if you don't do the things that you need to do in your windows of time that you have to get them done, you can die.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's scary. And I mean, the jokes, it's, I mean, it's not like this, they're similar. I mean, I've gotten people come up to me and they're like, I'd share that I'm a diabetic for some reason, and they're like, "Oh, but you're not overweight." And I'm like, "You don't say that to somebody. Like, I'm a very average build. I'm happy with my body. I have no issues with like how I look. Like and then they'll be like, "Oh, but you're not overweight. Like, you're not that heavy." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you can't say that anyway." But like, why do you think that would be okay? And
Is
then
that a common misconception that overweight people are by default diabetic?
yeah, so it's because so many type 2s, and that's like a whole nother stigma is that, oh, if you have type 2, you did it to yourself. Like it's the same kind of language. You did it to yourself. You haven't eaten right or exercised, and like that's why you're so overweight, and like that's how you got type 2. But a lot of it comes down to genetics for type 2 at the root of it. And so, like, it's a metabolic disease, and then type 1 is like autoimmune. So they're like kind of these even different tangents. It just depends on like how insulin resistance is with type 2, where because of genes or like more body weight, whatever, like you just can't at that moment produce insulin how you like are supposed to. So just with like lifestyle changes, a little insulin therapy, you're back on track. Type 1, it just like cannot reverse until there's a cure. So very different, but people lump them in just because of diabetes. So I get how they can be mixed up, but again, it's the assumption and just saying like, I mean, I had a friend who was like, "Oh, my dad's diabetic, and he's like a little overweight and like heavier, but like, what kind of bars do you eat to like manage your type, like your diabetes too?" And I'm like, like she's one of
So
my best friends.
so there's an assumption that all treatments are the same.
Yeah, all treatments are the same. Like you'll see commercials for anything for diabetes, but
Oh.
normally there's Dexcom commercials, which is the CGM I have, but type 2s can also use it. So I understand how it can be confusing, but it's so different. So it's hard to like take the comments of like anything dealing with weight or like, oh, you ate too much sugar, you did it to yourself, or like, oh, you can't have that, like, I'll get everything sugar free. It's like, no, 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 I can eat exactly the same. I just have to like medicate early for it, and then I'm super normal. So
So
yeah,
that's the extent of how having type 1 diabetes shapes your life and affects you on a day to day basis. You check yourself regularly so that you know your status, right?
yeah,
See where I'm going with
yeah.
this? And then
Ah.
um, the other thing is that, you disclose it to people. Why do you feel the need to disclose other than because of like the physical sites on your body raise
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah, well, okay, so two sides to that. So I've disclosed at work because if I were to pass out or anything, I do events too. So we'll use pre-COVID, we'd travel around and be in different locations, whatever, whatever. So I have like a glucagon pen, which if I pass out, if my number goes too low, um, I would need to like have this injected in me, go to the hospital, but at least like the glucagon helps in the transition, so my number doesn't go too low. I don't die. So I obviously told my coworkers near me at my desk in case I were to go low, they know what to do. Um, my my boss took it a little bit too far, and she had me write a manual out, which is a, I like had a whole separate thing. I had a combo with HR for other things, but they were like, you do not have to talk that much about something that's like a very personal condition that you're going through. So I think there's a line of like you can disclose how like you're comfortable and like what's necessary, but not crossing the boundary to the point of like, okay, don't like come at me with like, okay, you need to tell me everything and like that detail's wrong. Or, like, what does that mean? It's like some you need to do your own research if
Got it.
someone's disclosing to you, which does remind me a lot about herpes too. Um, and then, oh gosh, I just forgot. Work, sports I did growing up just because activity makes it fluctuate quite a lot. Yeah, and then dating wise, I would obviously disclose because when clothes come off, my sites are just left all over. People get freaked out because it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, I don't have to like say I'm a type 1 diabetic. Like before I take you back to my apartment, like I'm gonna have sites on my body. Like that just seems so
Have you ever
like not
played? Have you
necessary.
ever played with the idea of just making them think you were really kinky?
No, I never pushed it. I would just be like, don't pull this off, or like we're gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
Because
So this is
I
part.
just freak them out a little bit. I'm like, there's a needle in my body all the time. They're like, oh my god, I don't want to touch you. I'm scared I'm gonna hurt you.
Yeah,
So,
but you're not fragile. You know your body, you know your
exactly.
limitations, and in some ways you are more conscious of your body and its limitations to the point where you can articulate that to a potential partner, so that you can have a for more better or more pleasurable experience. Because I see and hear from, and it's unfortunate that it's always women for me,
Mm,
who don't maybe feel safe expressing, hey, here are my limitations. This is what you can
right.
do. This is what you can't do. And to hear you so confidently speak and say, all right, this is off limits. This is off limits. Like, it's almost as if having diabetes has given you a need to utilize your voice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wasn't always so vocal, which I know the shift happened when I had the Dexcom because it made it more visible to me. And so that was maybe like 3 years ago, but before that, I neglected my management, never told anybody if I didn't have to. Which honestly reminds me of the shift with my herpes too, is that when I was first diagnosed after this like terrible breakup, it was like pretty traumatic for me. Because that every time now I get an outbreak, I'm like, I'm so annoyed that this one guy is going to affect my dating life for the rest of my life, but it doesn't have to. Um, but yeah, I think I just, yeah, I don't know. It was so tough to move on past that, but I haven't disclosed yet, but I'm hoping that through this account that I've just made, I'm building my voice. I'm on dating apps now, like disclosing in the comfort of my home and just like practicing. So I'm hoping that the shift of actually disclosing, it'll be post COVID when it's like okay to go out and date like pretty normally again. But I'm hoping like that shift parallels too because talking so freely about my type 1 is like so empowering and just educating. And then the more I have to educate, you realize, okay, wow, people don't really understand like
Yeah.
what's the core of this. So
You
I
know,
think,
what
yeah,
comes to mind for me right now is that in your creation of your page, you're creating literally a resource that you can direct partners to as you disclose. So you don't have to go into the, again, talking about disclosure fatigue, and I'm just
mm-hmm.
letting you share so that I can tie everything back together.
That's
Um,
great.
but
I'm
how
looking at parallels
exhausting it
too.
is, when you look at your work asking you for a manual. All right, here's my Instagram page. go do the work yourself. I did this. Like I set the foundation for people to be able to
Right.
find this and then utilize it. Here, this is the extent of the work that I'm doing. Go do your homework.
Mhm.
If you have questions after you've done that and you can demonstrate to me that you've done that, then okay. So it's making you have to have boundaries around uh, your disclosures. Now, obviously, it's different for different people. Work only needs to know how it impacts you present at work. Uh,
Exactly.
Other people around you are impacted because if you do pass out in front of them, they need to know what to
Mhm.
do. In a relationship, similar thing, but perhaps a little bit more. You're going to be
Mhm.
physically intimate. You're going to be rolling around, touching each other. Certain body
Yeah.
parts are off limits with a partner. With friends, depending on the activities, it's the same thing. But more than anything, you have your experiences documented, you have your credible, trusted resources documented to where when it comes time to have a more extended conversation about diabetes and how it impacts you and how it would impact the people that you're disclosing to, you can just point people to chronic to care.
Totally. I know. I feel like on the account too, I'm sharing little stories that some of my friends don't even know. So it's been an interesting experience to be like, okay, this happened, and they might have like generally known, but they didn't know how much it affected me or like what it taught me or yeah, just like the reach that I'm able to then bridge together the account. It's so fascinating. I didn't really realize this when I made it. I was like, okay, I'm type 1 diabetic and have genital herpes. Like, cool, let's throw it together and see what happens. But I now have diabetics who I can vent to about like our diabetic like problems and whatever. But now they're like, I knew nothing about herpes. Like, this is so interesting that like I follow your account and now I'm learning about herpes, which I didn't really know anything about. So, and vice versa, like people who have herpes are like, I've never known anyone who has type 1 diabetes. So, some of my friends, every time I post the cold sore, anything related to like cold sores or oral herpes, they're like, wait, my boyfriend has that. Or like, oh, I've had that since I was a kid. I'm like, hey, welcome to the fam. Like, it's not a big deal. And I feel like I'm bonded with people more than I even knew we were bonded by. So it's just like a cool way that people can just learn about my whole life. Or there's a diabetic I follow, and she has herpes, and she's like, I'm quiet about it. I don't want to share anything like that on my diabetic page because it doesn't make sense. Um, so she's like, I'm glad you have an account because that's like my bridge of how I feel like I can vent and like be related to someone else going through the same thing. So the account's been a nice surprise. I don't think I expected so
Mm.
many people to like message me or I'm like hearing people's stories and advice and it's been like lovely because you don't really talk about I talk about type 1 as much as I can and now I'm like I want to talk about herpes all the time but I feel like you got to time it a little bit better
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah,
yeah
I'm
that's
all for
great.
people sharing their experiences as they're ready, and I can speak to something positive for positive people. When I first created the social media accounts, I didn't think that people would reach out as much as they have. I didn't think that I would find as much support as I had. I know that there would be people who would find the page and they would search me or whatever and message me privately, but I didn't think that so many people would be receptive to me sharing their messages anonymously, of course, and then having them be on the podcast. Because when I started this podcast, I shit you not, I thought that I was going to do one podcast episode a month.
Yeah.
One person per month was going to want to talk to me. There was a point where I had 3 months worth of podcast
Oh
episodes
gosh.
like laid out and didn't have
Yeah.
anything to do. So I've been
Wow.
able to do this on a weekly basis, and it has invited more discussions. It's invited community. I'm connecting to people who want to connect me to their resources and vice versa. So it's really a matter of understanding that when we put ourselves out there, be prepared for this where you have this
Yeah.
peace and sense of fulfillment, but also be prepared for your surroundings and what you're going into. You know your environment, you know your friends and family, you know your people, but you have to go into these kinds of things with boundaries. Otherwise, you'll experience compassion fatigue or even disclosure fatigue. You've done the
Right.
big disclosure, so now when people contact you, there's no need for you to go through the, well, I have da da da, unless it's someone new and they're like, oh my God, I just got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, type 2 herpes. I don't know how to deal with this. And then that's where your boundaries that you've already created and put in place are going to keep you from experiencing any type of fatigue in these interactions, because it can be draining to hear from people all the time who just come, take what they want from you, and then go on about their business, rather than
Right.
coming in and bringing anything of value to the table. Like, just, hey, I ran through all your content. I saved a few things. I sent something to someone. Like, do that kind of thing. Don't just, oh my God, I got herpes and I don't know what to do. I can't tell you how many of those messages I've gotten.
Feel like you need a draft saved because and so many people's stories are so different too. It's like, I did like a post. I mean, the post I do, I feel like I've done like myths and truths because I've gotten some comments that I'm like, this is so bothersome, especially the promiscuous one. And um, yeah, I just feel like sharing the truth side of it, like you didn't do anything to get it. And so many people, like, if you're losing your virginity and you get it, like, I can't even imagine that. But it's like, I'm here for you, but I can't even begin to think, like, gosh, that was the first experience. Like, hope it's not tainted, but then you have to deal with all of that build up and disclosing, moving on. So it's hard. Like, I'll listen, but everyone's story is so different. But I do think like finding that community does so much. I mean, when I was trying to start the account, like I could easily look up like type 1 and you'd see like hundreds of accounts. And then I'm like, how do I even start like building a community of people who might need to like follow a page like mine? And I couldn't really find anybody, but people have just like popped up, and they're obviously not going to like display it in their Instagram name or their bio, but they're like reaching out just to like find someone to kind of be like the voice that they're not quite ready to share. So like no pressure or anything, but I do like I take so much on, so I am going to be like wary,
Mm,
just to like stay sane too, because at the end of the day, it's like we're still going through
yeah,
just dealing with it too.
yeah.
Yeah.
You haven't had a lot of experience in dating with herpes, but having had diabetes for so long, you have plenty of experience there. I saw that you posted that you told someone you had diabetes and they ghosted you, or they were rude. What was it exactly?
Um, oh gosh, not with my. Oh yes, okay, yeah.
It was a while ago. I'm a creep.
No, no, no. It's crazy. So it was when I was on.
That dating site. We don't say their name here, but we know which one you're talking
Okay,
about.
cool. I just forgot it because I deleted it.
Good.
Because because of this experience, well, part of it, but yeah. So my whole point was like, okay, I'm on this app because then they know that I have herpes, and like that's the big thing that I want to disclose, and I'm so scared to disclose that. So now on this app, they already know. So like that big, like ominous cloud over my head wasn't even there, but they didn't know my type 1. And so, which normally that's like so easy for me to share because it's like, oh, this is a medical thing. Your body just like did it to itself. But I'll talk them back from like, I don't eat too much sugar. This is what it is, and then they'll get it and usually be really supportive. But yeah, this guy, I was like, okay, it's COVID. Like, what are we gonna do for the day with COVID and everything? Like, I'm type 1. I'm really careful. Like, I'm immunocompromised, which also like just with COVID, they kept saying like, oh, and you're
I was gonna ask you about that next. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't even know. Like, I just assumed I was like, okay, my body just like attacked itself, so I don't really know if I trust it to fight off this unknown virus. So like, I'm just gonna be very careful. But people are like, oh, I'm also diabetic. Like, I'm being careful too. But I just think it lumped everything together and didn't specify what type or like who should be more careful than like another type. So again, it kind of lumped everybody into one mix. And people just assumed like, oh, you have diabetes, like you need to be careful. And part of me, it's like, what type do you think I have? Like, there's just like no, I don't know, no need to clarify. So I'm just being like careful anyway, just out of caution. But people just now lump it into one category all over again. Uh, but yeah, so this guy, I told him I was type 1, and then he was coming back from California, so he was flying, and I asked him like, can we both get a COVID test before we see each other? And he was like, didn't even acknowledge the type 1, which for me, I was like, people get it, whatever. He was like, okay, you're too much of a handful. Like, I'm over this. Like, basically, it was so rude after me asking for a COVID test since he was traveling. I didn't think I was too out of line there,
You
but
weren't. Like,
I,
this is the kind of person who probably would have been upset about you asking him to have an STI screening before
yeah,
y'all had a physical interaction or before y'all
right,
even had sex. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm clean. I don't have sex with people with STDs. I imagine he talks like that. And
yeah.
then,
Oh,
like, he's talking about flying. You're immunocompromised. And this was just a completely insensitive thing. And I was very annoyed and frustrated for you when I saw this because it's like,
oh my God.
damn, you get herpes and you have to navigate that challenge. But I always tell people dating with herpes is just like dating, right? He
Yeah,
had
yeah,
herpes, and the issue was that you still wanted to be careful so as not to get another virus that literally, is has shut down the world. he
yeah.
he didn't
I
have
know
the
my whole
common
thing. I'm like, I
decency
don't.
to just
Right.
get a test. Just get the test. That's it.
Yeah, I know. In my health thought process, I'm like, okay, I don't want a third chronic condition. Like, I don't want to be a trifecta. Like, I just am avoiding COVID at all costs because I feel like diabetes is a lot 24/7, managing it. More visible, it's always on my mind. Herpes, I honestly sometimes forget I have it until I'm like super stressed and I'm like, okay, I feel weird down there. But it's really not that prominent. And I guess when like dating comes back up, it comes back into the mix. But like right now, I honestly am not dating. I feel like all I think about is my type 1. But now with the account, I'm like, it's so obvious how it can be so paralleled and how I can talk so freely about one but not the other. It's
Mm,
like another reason why I started it. I was like, why is this so annoying? I can't just like speak so freely about two things that are big in my life.
yeah. And then right
Yeah,
now,
no good. He's like long gone.
yeah,
Not
good.
for some time.
So herpes is a virus, COVID is a virus, diabetes is an autoimmune disorder. Is that accurate? What is it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's autoimmune disease or illness. I just always keep cross lumping them
Okay.
together.
Okay. Um so where was I going with this? Oh, talking about like disclosure. So now not only do you have to disclose your herpes status to a partner, you have to disclose diabetes and how a partner is impacted by that, and you just disclose your COVID concerns. Even has the political climate and the state of the world and social distancing, mask wearing, getting tested, so being mindful of the people you're around, has any of that been challenging for you to navigate more so than other things?
Yeah, I mean it's so interesting. Like Bros and Pros and like Ella Dawson, and then I'm gonna like mess up the sexual education. I
Oh,
don't know if her.
sex
Am I saying that
education.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Emily DePass. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They keep posting about. I think Ella had an article, and then like all these different charts, which it just blew my mind because I feel like I'm like just the disclosure and like all the different terminology that's so similar between COVID and like the stigma. It feels the same, and so and that's another reason why I just am trying not to get it because it would basically be me disclosing the same way I would with herpes, but just not herpes. And so, but like saying that someone has COVID, it just seems like it's something that's just happening right now and people talk about. Whereas with herpes, it's still this like hidden thing. But yeah, it's all these parallels, and I'll hear people talking, being like, "Oh, I got a test like 2 weeks ago. I'm negative," and I'm like, "No, you're not. No, you're not. Like, you don't know that." And so it just like reminds me so much of Herbie, and I don't know. I feel like I can't like speak out and be like, okay, well, actually, this is kind of like what I go through so it's like this internal battle in my head. Like I'll hear my parents talk about it, and I'm like, oh.
Hmm.
So
But you'd be
I just
speaking
don't
on
know.
behalf of so many people too, though, because it is an underrepresented population. You know, Ella Dawson spoke up on behalf of
Yeah,
the community of people with herpes. She spoke with her own opinion and just the experiences that she's had. Same thing with Emily DePaz. She's speaking to the experiences and the research in regards to how we're handling herpes and STI disclosures, diagnoses, to how we're handling COVID, because you look at it like masks are the equivalent of condoms. Social
yeah,
distancing and who your partners are is a direct reflection of, okay, well, who's worth the risk? I'm going to be around people that I might get COVID from. I'm going to have sex with people I might get an STI from. And
yeah,
now we're really having to be more mindful of those kinds of thoughts because we can, look up and be like, man, fuck, knew I shouldn't have had sex with her. I didn't. She wasn't worth getting herpes from, or hanging out
yeah,
with, a social setting, and you're like, God damn it, I knew I shouldn't have went to that gas station and pumped
yeah.
gas there. So
Right.
these are the kinds of things that are coming up, and
Yeah.
I've had clients who have been exposed to COVID somehow, some way, to some extent, and the conversations of just how shameful they kind of feel. Like, I did everything right. Like, I wore my mask, I washed my hands, I social distance, and I might have given this to somebody else. It's a lot around. It's a lot similar to how people deal with their own diagnoses. So imagine the fatigue that comes from that alone, because
Totally.
now you got to look at everybody you've been in contact with over the last however many days. You got to have
Yeah.
that
Full contact
conversation,
tracing.
and then you got
Mm-hmm.
to let them know, despite me being careful or I wasn't careful, I still got it. And you got to deal with whatever emotions they're going to throw at you. And then with herpes, sometimes you have to just completely explain it to people, like
Yeah.
from telling
Full
your
breakdown.
story, talking about the mental piece, talking about the stigma, talking about education, and you also have to do the same thing with diabetes. So I thought that having you share your experience was a really good foundation to set for this topic that I'm going to go over for the next several weeks, just discussing disclosure fatigue, what we can do for ourselves. And what I learned from you in our conversation alone is that it's important to have a go to resource that people can get your experiences from, because here you are, you have gone to therapy, you've dealt with your herpes diagnosis, you have to deal with your diabetes.
And it's your choice. It's
Yeah.
I'm
And
also glad what I'm saying is helping. I do think, yeah, the parallels is so important. And I mean, I'm sure there's so many people who have herpes but something else,
mm,
and they feel like they can only talk about one thing. But hopefully, just through one experience, they realize how it trickles down into other things too, and like makes a bridge. But
hmm,
yeah,
yeah.
glad
So
you had me on.
Oh,
Yay.
I'm glad you did this. Thank you, because I know you were hesitant at first to talk about it, but I
Yeah,
thought you were a great guest, and you spoke very well about everything, and this feels right. And I asked my audience, who should I interview about disclosure fatigue, and a couple of names came up, and then you just happened to message me when you did, and I was like, wait a minute,
meant to be. Wow, love that.
perfect. And I'll still interview these people too.
Good. Yeah, I feel there's so many different ways. And I was like hesitant because I was like I haven't disclosed a person to somebody. I was very close through the pandemic. She was very receptive of my type 1, and then something like with my sexual health came up, not with herpes, but he was not very receptive. So
Mhm.
I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Um, so it was that build up. I really wanted to, but I regretful that I didn't. So that was my hesitation. But I think disclosing with type 1,
Do
a
you
lot of practice there, per se.
Yeah. Do you feel any like guilt for dating during a pandemic or seeking companionship at all?
Well, okay, so I justify it as the two people I was with in the pandemic. I knew them prior to everything happening. So, um, and I mean, it was so tough because it's similar to like, are you with anyone else? Like, I don't want to get COVID. Like, are you just sleeping with me? And so it's this weird, like, kind of, again, like we were saying, it's paralleled with like, are you sleeping around or like who are you hanging out with? But yeah, I was with the last one for like 8 months, so it was like a good chunk of the pandemic, and then ended in September. Um, Now I look back and I miss his like snacks, which was very great for my lows. He was a stoner, so it was a great pairing. So maybe future, but not a great guy because he didn't prioritize sexual health, which I have realized that's pretty important now. Just like being so vocal about like testing and just like understanding like what herpes is. I do think it opens that door, which
Mm-hmm.
I didn't talk about sexual health before. So
Yeah.
another positive, perhaps.
Yep. And when we get to the point of talking about sexual health conversations, we realize how much it overlaps at the intersection of mental health as well, because we're not just talking about putting penises in vaginas, and we're not talking about just oral sex here. We're talking about sexual health. We're talking about gender. We're talking about sexual orientations, identities, triggers, safe words, relationship intentions, boundaries, what people need in order to feel safe. And in some cases, we're talking about, just do's and don'ts, consent,
Yeah.
all of these things in the umbrella of sex education that can be normalized with discussions around sexual health. Taylor, we are closing out this podcast. How can people find you?
You can find me at 2TWO underscore chronic underscore 2TO underscore care. So two chronic to care. Had to space it out so people could read it. But yeah, give me a follow. I'm just sharing all my venting out my stories and trying to relate and happy to answer questions. So yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. I'm so thankful that you were able to get on here and share as much as you did. I didn't expect the way that you were talking. I thought I was going to have to pull a lot out of you, but once you got the microphone on you, you just kept it rolling. So thank you.
I hope I didn't say the word like too much.
No,
One of the
trust me.
biggest.
So
Okay, cool.
when I was editing the podcast, I realized how often I said it, and I would just cut the likes out. And then when I interviewed people who said it, I recognized just how often they said it, and I just went, nope.
Yeah.
I have to make these conversations very concise because that's a lot of cutting, and I don't want to lose people to discredit the discrediting that comes from saying like and a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Love it.
concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast player. If you have the means to do so and you feel compelled to, please, please, please make a donation to Something Positive for Positive People. We're paying for people to get therapy if they're struggling with their STI diagnosis. Big things underway going into 2021, closing out the process. We've gotten 12, 13, I believe 14 people in the enrolled in therapy. I'm doing exit interviews and hearing nothing but great things. And just like Taylor here said, therapy was something that helped her throughout her herpes diagnosis and getting to the place that she is now with it. So I want to be able to do that for the world. When people reach out, I want to connect them to the resources that they need. So if you're someone who has access to grants, any sort of STD prevention efforts, or people with titles who have the authority to give funding and grants or make large lump sums of donations to an organization, please consider us. We're very close to being able to really do this thing. And I had the idea of partnering with local, or not local, but smaller mental health organizations who already provide therapy so that we can serve more people. But in a perfect world, we'd just be able to, when people reach out through the website, immediately connect them to a therapist and pay for their sessions in advance. That's the big picture goal. We're on our way there. We'll get there. And in the meantime, I'll just keep pumping out these podcast episodes on a weekly basis. You can see me on Instagram at H on my chest. I'm also back active on Twitter. So I stopped Twitter from being about something positive for positive people for a while. And that was kind of where I got my porn for the most part. And then I saw tweets, and there was like a need for me to jump into advocate mode. So I gave away my porn, y'all. I gave away my Twitter porn. You might see that I follow some pages on there that post sex videos, but it is what it is. It's normal, and I ain't got no shame about it. Till next time, stay sex positive.